Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Ryan and Rodrigo. And today we have my old friend John McCartney with us. And he's coming all the way from Seattle, my old hometown. And he's coming today to talk to us all about traveling around the world, teaching English. And to get us started, John, I notice a very interesting piece of art right behind you there, and I'm just dying of curiosity about it. Like, where where did you get it? What's up with that art there?
Yeah, I bought this, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, at in a little town called Canby, Oregon, and I bought it at Canby Days because I was down visiting our mutual friend John's family, like right around the 4th of July. I actually forgot the name of the artist who made this. It's a painting in a series, and so it's all about this person. I can't really. It'd be kind of harder for me to shift it for you here.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool.
so the person
Wow.
like on the left side has this kind of quest he goes on. This dark figure with a gun in the front is tracking him in this journey, and this like dragon comes up upon them, like sort of disrupting the scene. And so, yeah, this guy probably had like a dozen paintings in this series, and I bought this one for $50, which is that guy should charge more. He was quite skilled.
Yeah, that's cool, man. How many years ago were you in Canby? What were you? Was it recent, or do you remember?
I, I mean, this is probably like 11 years ago or something. It's
All
like
right.
it's been a minute since we've been there.
Yeah, yeah. Me too. I mean, I was there. I was there just at Christmas, but for general Canby days.
Canby days.
Yeah,
It's pretty nice.
that's that's been some time.
I don't think those
Uh,
happen this year, huh?
what are I don't know what are Canby Days? Tell me, both of you guys. Tell me a little about it.
Well, it's the 4th of July celebration. And so, like, the most Americana things you can think of, with like the parade that's led by the mayor of the town on like a classic 1950s car. And then the kids are walking behind, and there's a marching band from the high school, and there's a bunch of veterans carrying flags also. And they march through the town throwing candy, out into the street. Yeah.
Yep. Your
Oh,
friends, relatives like host you when you're there for the weekend and like start you drinking at noon or something. Like it's small town life in America. It's great.
Nice.
yeah.
Seems nice.
Yeah, yeah. And my parents actually live on the parade route. Yeah. So we went once, me and my wife now, and she thought it was like not real. She didn't think that such a thing actually existed. She thought it only existed in movies. And then we get there, and there's this parade going past the house, and she's like, "No, but
Yeah, it feels like the Sandlot out there or something. It's real cute.
for sure." Cool. So then, John, other than Canby, you know, the big tourist destination, where are some other places that you've traveled to?
Um, so I guess technically speaking, the United States, since I was born in the Philippines originally. Um, but I actually like compared to a lot of other folks in our circles, I haven't traveled to a lot of different places. I've mostly traveled to a couple of places for a longer chunk of time. So I've spent about a year in India, about a year in Turkey, um, probably a couple months in Nepal, and then like a handful of other places that have mostly been stopovers um, over the years.
Nice. And like you said that you haven't been to very many places, but you've been to a few places to like a longer amount of time. Was that a conscious decision? Did you do that on purpose, or did it just sort of happen that way?
It's definitely both. The like first long-term trip I went on was to India, and I knew that I was going to be staying in the same town there for at least a couple of months. Um, and having that experience like early on in my life as somebody who travels, um, it gave me a lot of things that I really enjoyed about it. Like one was being able to really get to know a place, feel comfortable there, walk around a lot. Another part was just getting more of an opportunity to practice local language and to like get to know people and like really ask them about things in town. I like those things much more than I like seeing famous things or other stuff like that. So when it came to be time that my wife and I traveled to Istanbul, to Turkey, to live and work there, it was an explicit idea to say, we're going to go somewhere for a long time, like really get to know it. And so it's intentional now.
Mm-hmm. And like, what are some of the things that you learned first in India? Like, you were there for a while. What are some things that you learned about the culture and maybe even about yourself, being away from home for so long and being in a different culture? What did you learn?
That's a huge question. I mean, going somewhere for a really long period of time, I was doing volunteer work there, and so there's a lot of different things. Not sure like what's within the scope of conversation because like I don't necessarily need to like go into like, oh, people who do humanitarian travel abroad work need to check their biases more. Like maybe that's like a thing we talk about, or like talking about different levels of like social structures and you know socialized medicine and things like that throughout different places. I um like or just I learned that people can talk to each other even when they don't know the same language at all. Like you can just talk, you don't actually need to ever really have a full vocabulary in something. I'd say maybe that's like one of the core things
Mm-hmm.
um, I've learned. Really region specific, I like to call India, despite the fact that, like, for anybody out there who has traveled to India from the United States, from Western civilized country backgrounds, a lot of people like remark on how different India can be, but I also think that it's the most similar place to the United States in the world of like any other major country.
Really, why? That's
Yeah.
fascinating because
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone say that about
Exactly.
India
I really
ever.
want to hear.
What I would say it's, India's got 27 states now. You have 17 officially recognized languages, but hundreds and hundreds of local languages that folks speak. You have people of incredibly different religious backgrounds. Um, you have fierce sports team rivalries. You have all this kind of stuff spread out across this huge biodiverse landscape. Um, I'd say it's a place where like everyone feels kind of foreign to everyone else in a lot of ways. India is not like this monolithic culture and everybody is the same kind of way, and the United States is not a very monolithic culture. I was there during an election, and it was very familiar to see how frustrated people were, and you would ask them about the candidates, and they would get mad in ways that I really related to. And yeah, to me, it feels like it's a country held together by nationality. Uh, and it like this sense of nationality forces people who would not otherwise get along to see themselves as being in a single group. And I think that's the case with the US as well.
That's that's really funny because I could say the same exact thing about Brazil.
Mhm.
Almost everything you said there, if you just changed out the very specific details you were saying about India to be about Brazil, it would be true here too. So like I don't know, very big countries. This is something that I've learned, I think, is that very big countries are like impossible to govern, and that and that all of the really big countries in the world are similar that way. They're similar because they're chaotic places that are just impossible to deal with.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Especially I noticed it this like the second time I traveled to India because I went there right after living in Turkey. Um, and Turkey, like, I mean, it's a huge and diverse place as well, but it does feel much more culturally homogenous, um, in that you don't find very many people who speak any languages besides Turkish. Like, I think about again, like in India, you're really likely, like, if you are Indian traveling around your own country, you're very likely to run into somebody that you don't share a language with. So people are used to that, and they're used to like trying to bridge a gap. I think like maybe here's the theme to our interview here. But I often would like when living in Istanbul, when speaking with my broken Turkish to someone, they'd be like, "Oh, you don't speak Turkish. Let's not bother talking. Like we're not going to be able to communicate." Whereas if I tried to talk to somebody with my really crappy Hindi or a Bengali, they'd always make an effort. They're like, "Oh, it's somebody else who can't really they can't really say stuff. I'm gonna try really hard." And like again, that's also not a universalized generalization. There's definitely people in Turkey who are always willing to like give me a chance and help me through stumbling dialogues, but I just feel like in India, folks are really prepared for it.
Yeah, I've had that experience in Brazil too. Do you think that Americans are that way? I mean, I know that recently there's been this whole cultural war about race and immigrants specifically, but I mean, even in Seattle, where people are supposedly more culturally accepting, are they more willing to bridge that language gap and try to help someone who can't speak English? What do you think?
I mean, probably no. Like I'd say in the United States, to answer the question more like more specific language, peop, I think you definitely have people here who are more English über alles. Like I think that you do have that element here, and that's because we do have a language that everyone does tend to use most of the time, whereas in India you don't have something that has quite the margin of like I'd say about 50% of people in India speak Hindi, where I think that probably in the United States it's going to be higher than 50% who speak English as a primary language. I don't know
Yeah,
the actual numbers, but like,
yeah, that's true. It's just like if we carry the comparison over to Brazil now, like almost everyone speaks Portuguese.
mhm,
And then the people who don't speak Portuguese, unless they're visitors, unless they're foreigners, they speak Spanish.
mhm,
And like something strange that I've found in South America is that the Brazilians are like always the ones trying to understand the Spanish.
mhm,
And the Spanish speakers are like, no thanks.
hmm.
Like, it's not really like, the Brazilians work harder to bridge the gap. And so, like, your explanation about how in India there's like 100 different languages, and that's why people are more willing to. I think that's part of it. But then Brazil offers this interesting case where everyone does speak the same language, and people are still willing to do it. And I find that interesting. Like, what is the difference maker here? It makes me curious.
I think that indigeneity is like a big piece of this as well. Like in India, you have the languages are there and have been there for 6,000 years, 7,000 years, 8,000 years. You have these extremely long-lasting heritages, and in a colonized country, you don't have that. The dynamics are either created ahead of time, or they're like enforced mostly by state power, you know. Whereas I do think your notions of who's supposed to speak what in what situations in India are like the nuance of something being tradition makes it safer to say, oh, here we're going to be speaking this. I don't know.
Is there a class difference in the languages too? Like, is it very? You were just saying, like, in different situations, different languages get used, and it made me think: is there sometimes a class-based reason to use a different language?
Absolutely. I would say, like, so I know West Bengal best. I spent about 6 months in Calcutta specifically, so that is one of the eastern states of India. And they mostly speak Bengali there, but you're going to find, again, lots of local village languages and such. And like, it is a class thing. So if you speak something much more specific at home with your family, you will be probably going into the city and speaking Bengali, which is like much more of a common language in Calcutta in specific. If you travel to somewhere in like Uttar Pradesh, which is like one of the most populous states, and it's right pretty close to the middle, you're going to be speaking Hindi a lot of the time. So I think that to speak in like your village language, I think it probably is even kind of inappropriate to use that term, but I don't have anything much better for it right now. I think that a lot of people do look down on that. And I mean, definitely, learning English has its own like category of like, oh, that's like a, language for business and stuff. You also have, and this is one of my favorite things about language in India, like this neutrality and safety to using English that using indigenous languages can kind of have those power imbalances. So like the official state language of India is English, right? And so everything the government does, they do it in English. And because that doesn't like prioritize one ethnic group or one language group over another, it's kind of like, because it is equally foreign to everyone who is Indian, using that as the state language is, I think, kind of a nice idea. I mean, it's weird, right? It's weird to use the language of the oppressor in order to like keep a better sense of equality, but you work with what you get.
Yeah, that is interesting that they worked so hard to get rid of the English, and then were left with using English to run their government, because what else are we going to do?
Can't they, don't they, or can't they use that in the wrong way? I don't know, in a twisted way. Can't they? I don't know. It seems weird to me. It's very different. It's something very different.
To like dig into more of the detail of it, you have like, so the really major languages there, you have Hindi, which is almost identical to Urdu. They sound the same, but Hindi uses the Devanagari alphabet, whereas Urdu uses the Arabic alphabet. And they also have like different greetings, like you don't say merhaba to someone who is Hindu, you don't say namaste to someone who is Muslim. If you try to make either one of those languages the state language, it is kind of like showing a preference It's worth noting that like there's a really strong anti-Muslim sentiment in Hindu culture, and it's been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there is a huge movement to set Hindi as the state language of India. But that would not only be like oppressive to people who have like a Muslim background, you also have, the southern half of India, which I haven't even traveled to. I've only been in like the upper northern half of the country. And there's not like, you don't even have the same alphabet down there. You have like Tamil and Telugu, and they like, whereas many of the languages in the north that use the Devanagari script, like they'll look really similar but different. Rajasthani looks a little bit like Nepali. It looks a little bit like Bengali. It looks a little bit like Hindi. You have the same general patterns. Like I was able to read stuff in like a language that I'd never encountered before because things transferred from other languages that I recognized. Once you travel south of basically the latitude that Mumbai is on, it's totally different. It's completely different set of sounds, different set of shapes. There's nothing. And so even though probably 25% to 30% of people speak a lot of those southern languages as their primary language, they would be really pissed if you said, okay, we're changing all the signs, we're changing everything to be Hindi now. And the voting majority of the country would never accept letting, the sort of racist-ish, it's not racist, but cultural supremacist thing that like people in the north say is like taking things from the rice eaters from down south. Northern India is more bread-based kind of cuisine. South is more rice-based. You'd hear people say that kind of stuff. Like we're not gonna do it like the rice eaters. It's only South Indians. Which is
so. Like I'm trying to understand this, and to make a comparison it's not going to be perfect, but to make a comparison, like if you look at Western Europe, you have kind of like the Rhine River kind of separates the Germanic languages from the Romantic languages, right? Uh-huh. And like if you speak a Romantic language, you can kind of understand other Romantic languages. Sort of like what you were saying, that you would never encounter these languages, but you saw them and you could read and maybe even understand somebody who was speaking a little bit, not entirely, but a little bit. But as soon as you cross that line, it's an entirely different language, and you have no idea what they're saying. So is it like that, sort of?
Yeah.
Kind of?
I think.
And is it a different culture too, in the same way that like French and Italian and Spanish culture is even similar-ish compared to Germanic culture, which is like another thing?
I mean, I'd say, yeah, we're starting to get outside of like what I am well informed about. To like try to roll back really far back in history. India was a land of, I believe it's Devanagari peoples originally, and then you have the Aryan invaders from the north. The identity of who these people are, of course, is still not entirely settled upon. It's like, pretty surely like some Central Asian groups, and and this sort of migration and displacement of people that happened between about, 3,500 BCE to about 2,000 BCE. And like the way that people sort of crushed the cultures that were there, but took ideas from them and then redesigned their own ideas about what their own culture was about. Like this kind of remixing of cultural values and beliefs happened so long ago that it leaves like a really clear imprint, but there's so many generations of change like that come after that point. Like here's a kind of road to go down, a fun little anecdote in this story and talking about languages and stuff. A lot of stuff that you're going to find in Hindi and Urdu exists in that language because of the Mughal invasion. And so when the expansion of like, Muslim of the Muslim Mughal Empire occurred in the 1200s or so. This was not just happening from the Middle East down toward India, but this was also, going out across Central Asia as far as China. This is like in many ways where the Uyghurs came from. So you have this thing that's like spreading all across the entire Eurasian continent, right? A word that I recognized in Turkish, sabza, which means vegetables. When in Nepal, I was like working through the alphabet of Nepali. I had a book that I'd picked up, and I was like in a cafe, and I was like looking at some things on the menu. I realized that like the thing that I was reading was labeled like shabja. And I was like, okay, so that must be the veggie momo, the thing that I'm eating. And they don't use like Arabic numerals, the same ones that we do there. And so essentially I'm like reading this menu at the same time that the person in this place is like bringing us our bill, and he's like, all right, so that's 200 rupees a plate. And I'm like, yeah, except it says on the sign that it's 50 rupees a plate for the vegetarian momos. And he's like, very good, 50 rupees a plate. And I was like, all right, great. But like, it was neat because here I was trying to like piece together this new to me alphabet, but like the phonetic sounds was making a word that I recognized from pretty much Europe,
How far away is that? How many like miles or whatever is Nepal from Turkey? That must be.
I mean, I can't really do you in numbers for this, but it's like you go past, Azerbaijan, past Iraq, Iran,
It's like a third of the
Afghanistan,
planet, right?
Pakistan, like, yeah, across that whole distance. But it is the same word for vegetables that you're going to find in Arabic as well. It's just like the same kind of phonemes that go into it. Another one of those fun ones in Istanbul, you have raka, which is this pretty much ouzo. For those of you who are familiar with the Greek drink, it's just this kind of clear, milky or clear liquor drink, right? Well, you have raka, and then you have in Nepal raksha. And then like what I've found, and I don't remember all of them now, is that like you have all of these similar kind of indigenous liquor drinks that, especially in like mountain cultures and like small villages, people are like making this stuff in their backyard, just like spread all the way across that part of the world, just the whole Middle East into Central Asia. And it's like the same kind of ideas about pouring that for a guest kind of like play out across this whole region. The same ideas about, the time of day that you're supposed to do these things and how you serve people at your table. It's neat because you can really just see these layers of history, and you can understand, like, just because of the exact words, the exact sounds they're using, you can get a sense for like when that became a cultural norm, because you knew it had to have come in at this particular time.
Yeah, I saw a thing recently about tea, and that from almost all of the world, there's only two base words for tea. There's the one that if the Europeans arrived by ship is tea, mostly the British. And then if they didn't get there by ship and you had mostly the Muslim trade routes, is a shah or a chai, or is this word. And almost everywhere on the planet, people call tea one of these two things.
Yep.
And so you can trace it all the way back to colonialism, and you can know the entire history of a place by what they call tea.
Yeah. It's pretty neat.
It's pretty cool.
That's like the Kevin Bacon theory for tea, right?
Yeah. And well, you said a really cool story about that, but can you remember like the most memorable place that you were in India? Somewhere that you'll never forget, a landmark or a place. I know that you said that you really prefer the culture, but I'm sure that you saw something really cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, it's quite a place, and like, even though, you know, I've taken a train past where the Taj Mahal is and never stopped to go to see it, like, and again, that's like sort of what drives me through things. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. Even by accident, you're going to run into things that are just unbelievably beautiful. I think that the city of Benares, Varanasi, Kashi, whatever, lots of different names for it. Varanasi is the most anglicized version, and I think that's what most people would recognize, is a city in Uttar Pradesh on the Ganges. It's considered to be a very auspicious place to go when you die, and that's where the sort of very famous cremations on the Ghats, which is the name for like the steps and the temples that are right there on the Ganges. That place is just incredibly striking in every kind of way, because you have temples that, again, they've been there for 6,000 years, continuously used, you know, the whole time.
That's something about India that I really want to go to India just to understand time a little bit differently, because for Western European people, they think of old and they're like, oh, ancient Greece. Yeah, that's old. But like that was maybe 500 BC. Like
Yeah.
maybe, perhaps. But old for India is like 5,000 BC. 5,000. That's old in India. And like these temples that you're talking about are still there. They're still operating. They're like, yeah, it's there. It's fine. It's not old. It's the thing that's there, and it's from 3,000. Like,
yeah, it's just
the concept of time is just totally different than anything I've ever experienced.
It's beautiful. It's incredible because so many things are just layered up on top of each other over the years. This town is still also home to one of the most like prestigious universities that you can send your kids to. You know, it's like, I do think it's like a very humanities oriented place, so you don't tend to have like a lot of Westerners who would send their children to go to school here unless, you know, they're specializing in Vedic literature or you know, Hindu theology, which would be super dope stuff to study. Like, I would love to spend time there. You have that, and it's also uniquely the site of Sarnath, which is the first place that Siddhartha Gautama like delivered a sermon. So it's like one of like the important pilgrimage sites within Buddhism as well. And in the big temple that they have in town there's this fresco that was done by this Japanese artist in, I think, the 80s or so, and it's beautiful. And to me, like, that's one of those images always has stuck with me. Like, it's you go inside of this place and there's like this picture. It's almost like an Art Nouveau style of art. It's not what you would expect to see in this place, because you have like the older kind of architecture outside, but then you go in and you have this kind of turn of the century style thing. And yeah, it's a really beautiful piece. I just love how all those things fit together. And so to like name one site, it would easily be Varanasi as like a town overall. Yeah.
Cool. So now, changing a little bit,
Mhm.
what made you decide to go to Turkey? Like you said that it was a conscious choice that you wanted to go and experience the culture for a long time. So what is it that made you want to go to Turkey and teach English? What led you to all of those decisions?
A lot of different things actually. The person who had the idea first was my wife Emily, and she had traveled to Turkey when she was in university, and she had just really, really loved it there. Um, a lot of what I specialized in studying when I was in university was early modern history. So a lot of the period of time, like the era of colonialism and the early modern period. So the 1500s through till the 20th century is my academic area. So the Ottoman Empire has always like loomed large in my understanding of how the world came to be. And so going to that place to see, you know, Istanbul, and like when we lived in Turkey, we lived almost like we were almost exclusively in Istanbul the whole time. We lived there. On the European side, we traveled to the Asian side for our job. Um, it's the best real estate you can get, you know? Like it's the middle of everything. It's in the best spot. Um, Quite a place, you know? It is a city of, I think, was it 25 million when we were there in the metropolitan area? It's huge. It's a ridiculously busy city. It has every form of public transit you could possibly ask for. It's really well run in terms of the public transit. Like there are no bus schedules because the bus is going to be there in 2 minutes. It does not
Oh my
matter
God.
where you are, what you're doing. If you go to a bus stop, the bus is going to show up before you can like finish a cigarette. Like you're cool. You don't have to worry about stuff like that. Um, just really, really neat.
It sounds
So
like a well-run São Paulo,
Yeah.
because São Paulo is about that size, maybe a little smaller. I don't know, hard to know, but is not administrated very well. Some things are better than others, but not the public transit system at all.
yeah, It's definitely. I mean, I've been in Tokyo as well. I feel like I would need to spend more time there in order to give it a fair shake. I feel like just because it costs like almost nothing to take a bus in Istanbul and in Tokyo, like you can really waste a lot of money taking the wrong rail like to the wrong spot and having spent a whole bunch. I think that Istanbul's got some of the best public transit in the world. It's great.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Super crowded. I'm going to tell you, it is like you're like stuffed up against the window on the buses sometimes. Like whatever, that's cool. Like I'm fine with that. Costs like $1.50 to travel like 60 kilometers. It's like whatever.
And it's
No complaint.
fast too, or did you get stuck in traffic, or how
That,
is it?
that boy, that one can really depend. I will tell you. So across the Bosphorus Strait, um, right? You've got two big bridges, and then you've got ferries, and they have. I don't know if it's done yet, but they have the Marmara project where they're building a railway subway underneath the Bosphorus Strait. Um, if it is winter and it is snowing and you need to go from Europe to Asia or the other direction, you could lose 8 hours of your life. Like it might just happen that because it really is only two bridges and you're committed once you get on like once the bridge gets on the highway, you're like, oh boy. So there were some times where I like called in sick to work just because I didn't want to even risk it. I'm like, just the idea of getting in traffic on a snowy winter morning. Mm-mm.
And how much time did it normally take? A typical day. You had to go across the Bosphorus, and it took how long to get to work?
Oh gosh, we had a like some days we had some absurd commutes. Can you do screen shares here on?
Yeah, there should be a button down there
I
at
see
the
that.
bottom.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
I need to get I'm gonna get a map up to right here. But we took a much longer route than a person normally would. Um, but all right, I got the share screen here. Start sharing. I've got you. Okay. So if we're looking at, we lived just about here in like this kind of central part of the western half of the city, and then we worked down. So our office was in this neighborhood called Kadikoy,
All right.
and then we went down to this business park area all the way down in an area called Pendic. I'm not sure how far I'd have to go down to find that. And that, oh boy, I mean that was like actually a couple hours.
That looks like it's
Because
quite a hike, man.
yeah, it was a huge distance because we would end up going taking the bus into our office, and then we would go from our office to this other company. So like what we did, let's see, how do I unshare screen since I don't need to do that anymore. We mostly taught adults. It wasn't, school teaching for kids, and our business like offered other businesses teachers who would like go and teach your whole staff. And so we worked. Our biggest contract that we had, or like the one that we spent the most time with when we were there, was a radiator company down in like the industrial district. And yeah, we were there late as well because classes were after everyone else was done with work. So we'd usually start around 6 p.m. and we end at 9 p.m. A lot of people had like private drivers and stuff like that. And we were just lucky that their company would send us with their private drivers that take their employees home to also drop us off at home. So our way home was not as bad as the way out.
That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually sounds not so different from a lot of the experience that I've had, or Rodrigo too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like teaching adults, working in companies sometimes, or at a school. But the adults, like how widespread is English in Turkey, or at least Istanbul? I guess that's more of your experience. Is it very, very common to meet people that speak English, or not so much?
Quite uncommon. Like we could kind of count on people not knowing English if we were in public and talking to each other. Like it was like a safe secret language kind of thing. They were starting to teach it more commonly in schools for the young, and so within our building, like nobody spoke any English whatsoever. I think probably on our entire block, nobody spoke any English except for one or two little kids. And so our downstairs neighbor's daughter who is 10, was like the only other English speaker, and like barely, of course, in our building. And that's different from part of town to part of town. Like we lived in a pretty working class neighborhood. We were directly across the street from a factory. And, it's not a place that like, foreigners, the Turkish word for foreigner is yabancı. It's not a place that you would find yabancı. Everybody knew that like we were yabancı first off, and that was like our names within the neighborhood.
The Yabanja are there.
Yeah, no, like one time I bought an appliance. I bought like a range for our kitchen, and on the receipt, because I told them my last name and they couldn't handle it, and so the receipt they wrote John Yabanja, that was like, if I needed to pursue a warranty, like that's what I was going to walk in there with. They named me John Foreigner. So that part's cool.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, people are like really, they speak Turkish. They're not very interested in learning too many other languages at all. People will learn Arabic for the same reason that people will learn Latin or something in a Western civilization. Like they're doing it for aesthetic and cultural and religious reasons. Sometimes people speak German because of like stronger trade deals with Germany than many other places. And like mostly people don't like the idea of traveling outside of Turkey for like vacations. That was like a thing that was really interesting. They're like, why would we go anywhere else? Like the Ottoman Empire is like the seat of like the entire world. This is the best place you can possibly go. I go for a vacation to Chile, which is like this little fishing village outside of Istanbul that you can take a bus to. I'm like, I go to Chile for vacations. It's very perfect, and then I go back home, and then that's it. The idea of going like very far, it's like it's wild. I met a handful of people who like spoke Italian because they're like, "Ooh, I want to visit Italy. Like that's really cool." Yeah, you don't find very much of that.
So what were your students like? Why were they learning English? What was different about them?
Their bosses were telling them to. Like that's the reason why. Um, you're gonna be familiar with this. You're gonna like in the corporate world. There's this like thing that I think of as playing for points. It's like it's not actually important. It's not going to make you more money, but like, wouldn't it be cool to have a company car? Like, wouldn't it be cool if all of our workers spoke English? They work in a radiator factory, but we're going to teach them all English.
I know. You said radiator factory, and I was like, English in a radiator factory? Like, why?
I mean, there were often like I worked with some of the lower level students and then some of the really high level students, and Emily had like the whole big intermediate crew, and it was it was useful for like the advanced students that I had who were like nearly fluent at this workplace because they worked in like the marketing department and like the sales department and like actually did interact with people who spoke English sometimes. Much of the rest of the company did not need to do it, but again, they were just like, it's a package deal for everybody. And that's nice. It was cool.
Sure. All right.
Not very different from what we experience here, right? Ryan, when we teach in companies, it's not only when we teach in companies, but most of our students, most of the companies, they demand English or they require English because it's just people need English, right? Oh, but do you use it there? Not really. Have you ever used it? No. And that's so people just keep learning and then they stop and then they start learning again, and then some people never really speak and then they almost speak, and it's a difficult relation with English, right? For most people, and it's like an eternal intermediate level for most people.
Mm-hmm.
They'll always, not always, of course, but it seems that they'll always be intermediate, pre-intermediate, intermediate, then they stop for 2 years, and then pre-intermediate, then intermediate again. It's very similar to our experience down here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, other than what you said about nobody wants to travel outside of Turkey, which that sounds more like Americans
Yes.
to me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that it's. I actually have to say, I mean, I've been living in America for most of my life, but I think that Turkey is like the most nationalistic place I've ever been. Like the proportion of people who've got like a Turkish flag hanging in their window, it's up there. And I knew a lot of folks who you know, they had questions and they had objections to things, you know. Um, but there's something very important about being Turkish in Turkey, and there is a, you know, I don't want to, I struggle, you know, because I want to give my deepest feelings, and I also want to give people some credit. So I'm going to say something really unfair here. But, you know, the Ottoman Empire was like a big deal a century ago, and they've really kind of treaded water since World War, World War II ish. Um, and the modern state of Turkey, the country, is a, you know, it's a powerful place. They did not have as much of a hit during the recession. We were there in 2012, and so it was like 2012 through 2013, and like um, things weren't bad. And to see like how many other places in the world had been like really rocked by the global recession at the time, and to see that in Turkey, like markets were expanding, people were doing well for themselves, people were optimistic about the future. Like it was cool for that sense. But I also felt like there's like this very elevated idea of the importance of Turkey to global politics that comes from once being that centerpiece of the world, you know? Like if you were like visibly a foreigner and you were taking pictures somewhere, people would be like, "Oh my God, it's a CIA spy. They're here because like the United States is trying to overthrow our government because they're really afraid of us." Like they just can't deal with like how powerful we are, and they're always trying to scheme and take us down. And I was like, God, guys, I don't know how to tell you that that's not true. like, like most
Oh
people
man.
in the United States do not know that you're here.
You think,
Yeah.
sorry, you think that something similar to, I know it's difficult to predict anything, but something similar to that could happen to America, for example. In 100 years, then people in China, I don't know, or in Turkey, they're just looking at Americans and going, guys, not anymore.
I
Something like
mean,
that.
I think we're there. It's just not as far along. Like I definitely think we're in the, you know, twilight days of our global superpowerness, and I don't think that that's something we need to fight too hard to hold on to or anything like that. There's no great value in it, but it's more to me just the interesting sort of delusional nature of like thinking that like you're of having like a nationalist idea or ideal when you're like objectively a kind of small country with, you know, a decent sized population, a comfortable GDP that allows your folks to be happy, but you're not exactly kicking ass and taking names out there from
The,
you know
the
your whole.
CIA isn't sending random agents to take pictures of this building.
Yeah,
Like
it's just
that's that's not happening. I'm sorry.
and
Uh,
like it was a really common attitude, and it like stuff like that came up in the newspapers quite frequently. Like every month or so I would see something about like maybe this is some kind of like CIA plot. And there's other reasons for that. I mean, we've definitely.
there were a lot of CIA plots in Turkey during the Cold War, right? So
Exactly.
they have reason to
Exactly.
be suspicious.
Yeah.
It's not totally crazy,
Exactly.
but at the same time, calm down a little bit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what was the one thing? There was like a really funny. Well, okay, this is actually coming in from a slightly different angle, but I'm always interested in trying to see people's perceptions of different things. One question I love to ask, maybe you've done this as well in Brazil. I would always ask people, like, first off, like when you're voting, like what's really important to you? What are your issues that are like really high up here, and like what are the issues that are less important? Um, And then I would ask them, what do they think about voters in the United States, about what they care about? And like the takeaway there was incredible. What they all said that terrorism is like the biggest fear that they have in Turkey, and like they need to have leaders who are strong and they're going to protect them from terrorists. And you know, this was during the earlier days of the conflict in Syria. You do have in like eastern and southeast Turkey, you have, you know, generations of unrest over there. So it makes a lot of sense that people might have that point of view. But then when I asked, what's like the most important issue for voters in the United States, my students almost universally answered in this one class, this was not always true, but in this one class, they're like, Israel. That is the most important issue for people in the United States. Is like making sure to protect Israel at all costs. And like, but when you do think about it, and like the amount of intervention that we do on behalf of Israel, and when you are in a country that has like constant like friction with Israel, it like made sense for people to have that point of view when like what you're seeing in your news all the time. But yeah, that was a really important takeaway for me from talking to folks.
Yeah, that like people in different places have a totally different understanding of events, and like a different narrative in their head about what's going on. Because like in the United States, like the people in power definitely do things with Israel a lot, but like the average person barely knows that Israel exists. They're like, yeah, Israel, it's cool, it's there, and I'm glad that it's there. That I would think is the typical American voter. Is just cool, Israel, great, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They're not caring every day about whatever the hell is going on there. That's not
right.
But because Turkey is just right there next to Israel. It's in the news all the time, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. So, and this is only a few years after there had been this there had been an armed sort of conflict between Israeli soldiers and Turkish soldiers. Oh gosh, I should have looked this one up again or something if I knew I was gonna bring it up. But it was only like 2 or 3 years prior to our time there. It had to do with Cyprus and like who is allowed to like travel by boat in this particular area. I think that someone was trying to drop off someone from Turkey. I remember it now. It was like a non-governmental Turkish organization was trying to bring aid to people in Palestine, and like Israeli, Navy folks like stopped the ship and like arrested everyone on board and like dumped the stuff. And Turkey was like, a lot of people there were like, whoa, this is like a humanitarian like thing that we're trying to do. And Israel's like, you don't bring stuff to Palestine. The end. Don't do it. We're gonna fight you if we have to. And like that like really pissed off freshly an entire nation of people who already were predisposed to not like Israel too much. So
yeah, I imagine.
And I think we stood by Israel on that one. The United States. We're backing them up. So you have to stand down.
And now Brazil.
Huh?
What?
Oh, I didn't.
Sorry. And now Brazil. Brazil is behind Israel and America.
Mm.
Or president.
Yeah, as I was going to say.
Yeah, not the nation.
More Bolsonaro thing than.
Yes, exactly. Our president. Not our president, the president.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm familiar with how that works.
All right. So now a little about just the teaching. Do you remember like what was the most difficult or frustrating thing for you to try to teach? When you were trying to teach English, like, do you remember something that the students just didn't get and it was hard for you to try to teach to them? Like now, trying to teach Brazilians, something that they just can't do is the ed at the end of words. So like you have played and I don't know, wanted, sure. And Brazilians want to make every ed like wanted. And so they say played teacher. No, that's wrong. No. Oh, but why? It has ed is played. No, it's not. And it's
not very. I was going to say not very many of those things loom large in my memory anymore. Like, it's been a long time since I've been an ELL teacher. I know Em would probably have some things to say from her experiences right now. Although, like, she has students from, like, every kind of background, and so she doesn't have, like, a uniform, this is the, the thing that people do. No, I quite frankly, I think that I was usually most challenged by our schedule, by the length of those commutes and working late at night and all that kind of stuff. Low motivation, like, because people knew that they weren't going to be using English and they just didn't care.
Yeah.
I know that there were definitely lots of little challenges in terms of pronunciation and things. I just kind of, I just keep coaching people through that stuff. But nothing that stands out in my mind.
That stands out. Well, then, how have you? Because now you teach English literature, right?
Yeah, English language arts,
English language arts. Okay, so do you think that teaching English, like ELL, in Turkey, contributed anything to teaching English literature, English language arts, and how?
Yeah. I think to answer that, what I would say is that you have the three traditional parts of teaching, which is assessment, instruction, and planning, right? And I think that a lot of what I gained at the time that I was working in Turkey, I hadn't had too many experiences of like full classroom instruction. And so just getting the notion of that cycle of like how you plan, how you can tell what your students understand and then implement things to help them, that cycle was really important. And I would also say that the piece that probably transferred best comes from like assessment. And we did an unbelievable number of intake interviews. That was like one of the little side stories of what we got into over there was that we helped our company that we worked for land a deal with an organization called Acıbadem, which is like the largest hospital system in Turkey. And so we went to probably 11 different hospitals in the time that we were there, and then did intake interviews for almost all of their employees. So we've probably talked to thousands of people to like assess their English skills. And we had a regular form for doing it, but of course, forms don't always tell you everything that you need to know. And so just like learning how to do that, and to just like those days where we'd sit and like for 4 hours just knock through interview after interview of people being called from like the other parts of their job to like come in and see what kind of English instruction they qualify for. The amount of organization that would have to go into trying to plot classes from that. That was the stuff that really helped me. As a public school teacher in the United States, in Seattle, Washington, I have 150 kids per year that I work with. And like when you think of like the workload of a day of school, it's like, let's say there's 2 pages worth of writing that they do on any given day, right?
It's
Now you
300
think about that,
pages.
300 pages a day, and per week we're looking at 1,500 pages of here's where my kids are at that I have to process through. And like we all know, that's not possible. Like that's not every single week of your life possible. So you learn to like spend your energy in like the most effective spots, you know? To like for me, I really focus on giving my students lots of authentic ways to tell me what they're understanding, not understanding. I try to just keep my energy there, but then I also know I'm working with kids who are 11 and 12. They don't know themselves perfectly, so I also have to have another way of watching. And I think the same thing goes in language instruction. I would have to notice the same things. People having like a particular issue but not being conscious of it and needing to figure out how to pry in there to tell them, oh, here's how you can improve on this, or just supporting people in their ways of challenging themselves.
Hmm.
Question. Quick question.
Yeah.
I didn't understand this. I didn't get exactly the number. 2 pages. Each student, they do 2 pages of writing every day.
Ish, sure. um and then I have like 150 kids, so that's like 300 per day.
Okay. All right.
And then if I
That's
have
that compared to because I'm thinking about Brazil. We barely write. We don't usually write in school.
yeah.
Um, and I always compare how American people, like for example, here in Brazil, we learn a lot about grammar.
Hmm.
Okay, a lot, and it
Yeah.
seems even when we were kids, it seems weird to learn about like specific grammar because we're in the fourth grade, fifth grade, learning about complex grammar, and I always tell my students that um, in America, the education seems, I don't know, I don't know so much, but it seems more practical. People write and people have this debate classes, and most of my students, when they finish high school, they don't know how to write a text, structure a text, structure
Hmm.
a paragraph. They don't know what a topic sentence is. They don't know. Uh, so when you told me this number, I was like, okay, that's. I thought it was more, but that's much more than I thought of. Okay, yeah, that's
Um,
interesting.
and John, just maybe compare, because I've been telling Rodrigo for almost 10 years now what my experience was growing up.
Yeah.
And now just compare like maybe what your kids do and also your experience growing up. Um, what Rodrigo was saying about Brazilian students is that they teach them the rules and the structure of grammar. Like in the same way that like how you teach an adult English is like, here is the present simple, here is the present perfect, here is how they fit together, blah, blah, blah.
Since the
And
first grade.
I never remember any of that ever in English class. Like the first time that I learned these words existed was when I started teaching English.
Yeah. I think there's something to be gained from explicit grammar instruction and stuff like that. I don't do it. I mean, like, I do. I don't like say, well, kids, today, here's what the lesson is. We're going to learn present simple. Like, I don't believe in doing it that way. And every every school district in the United States is different. Every classroom is different. There's you can definitely still find people who they move through like the classical idea of English language arts learning, and there are people who do sentence diagramming and stuff like that these days. I will do a workshop like here or there about certain grammar points when kids don't do something right, and like we tend to hit up really big things like passive voice stuff when it arises that they're doing that too much in their writing. Um, but the philosophy these days is that students will learn fluency by practicing language in authentic ways, and the primary thing is to get them to communicate real, authentic ideas much of the time. That was not as much the case when I was growing up. I think, Ryan, we've probably had very, very similar upbringings because we're both Pacific Northwest. So like there is a degree to that, I think, in schools when we're growing up. But right now, like I would say the typical kind of cycle of what you might see happen in the first 5 minutes of my class, for example, would be you come in, you get your notebook, all that kind of stuff. There's some kind of question up. The warm-up question might be something like, okay, does art really matter? Can art actually affect something in the world? You got 2 to 3 minutes to write down your answer for yourself. Then you're going to turn to the person next to you. You're going to talk to that person. Then you're going to get in a group of 4, and then you're going to all talk about your answers right there. Now you're going to go back, you're going to write again for another 2 minutes silently, and then everybody in the whole class has the chance to raise their hand, report out, or I'm calling on people randomly. And that's a good 10-minute chunk, and then usually from there, it's going to go into a period of time where independently they've got, a set of different readings that have different points of view, perhaps. And then they all have to kind of explore that on their own. There's usually going to be something they have to produce out of it, like, how is your opinion different from 2 or 3 of the writers that you read today? What's one thing that you really agreed with from all of these folks? If you could talk to one of the people who wrote the piece that you read, what would you want to say to them? Stuff like that to get them engaging with the ideas and to notice the differences between how they think and how other students in the room think. That's much of what it ends up looking like. It is worth mentioning that I want more explicit grammar instruction is one of the most common requests I get, in all of my surveys. They're what can I do to improve this class? And they're teach me more about sentences. But I tend to do that in the format of as I'm walking around and they're doing all the different weird things that they do every day, I'll sit down next to somebody, look into their notebook and be oh, this is wrong. You need to fix this piece right here, and we can have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Well, you already live with a full-time ELL teacher, but yeah. I will tell you as a full-time ELL teacher that more explicit grammar instruction is not that helpful.
Right.
And that's exactly what students ask for. Usually when we do assessment, people tell us, not usually, that's 99% of the time.
Yes.
They say, my vocabulary is very bad. I don't have a lot of vocabulary, and I need to learn about grammar. I said, why would you need to learn about grammar? You're not going to be a teacher. Teachers need to learn about grammar to not teach you about grammar.
Yeah. Well put.
So, well, but that's what people ask us all the time. Grammar, vocabulary. It's weird.
Yeah, I think you see the same thing. You see the same thing up here. So.
All right. Well, it's good to know that our problems are everyone's problems.
Indeed.
Politically and lyrically and linguistically, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing the show, John.
Yeah,
thanks for doing this interview. It was really fun. I learned a lot about India that I had never known before, and also some stuff about Turkey. That's Istanbul is on my list of top places that I really want to visit. So
beautiful town, beautiful place.
And maybe sometime in the future we'll have you back, learn some more about some other things going on. But until then, thanks for coming, and thanks everybody for watching. And we'll see everybody next week. See you guys later.
Thank you very much, Sean.